Morning all, I'd like to show you a game this morning of great historical importance, especially because we're looking at Nottingham 1936 at the moment on this channel. What players did Fischer play from that classic tournament, Nottingham 1936? Well, he did have one game against Mikhail Botvinnik, which is on this channel. He never played Capablanca. Did he play Max Euwe? Well, actually, yes. 3 times, in fact. In 1957 and 3 years later at Olympiad. He also played Ruben Fine, as we know. He also played Rzewski many times, but I don't think any of the other players, not Alekhine, Flor, Lasker, Vidmar, Bocholojubov, Tartakoa, Tyler, Alexander, Thomas or Winter, but we have not seen on this channel games against Max Euwe. So in 1957 there was actually a 2-game exhibition match against the former Dutch world champion at the Manhattan Chess Club. Let's have a look at Max Euwe playing white against Fischer. d4. Fischer played knight f6, and after c4 Fischer played e6. That's wanting to play the Nimzo-Indian, but actually after knight c3, the early Fischer was only 14 at the time, but by the way later to become a very young US champion. At the end of the year there was the US Championship, the 10th US Championship, held in New York City at the end of 1957, the very same year this game is played. But here the Nimzo isn't played. Fischer plays d5, so we have a Queen's Gambit declined, and now the exchange variation: c takes d, e takes d, bishop g5. Now Fischer plays bishop b4, so it's a kind of hybrid between Nimzo-Indian and Queen's Gambit declined. e3, h6, bishop goes to h4, and now Fischer plays c5. Slight issue with c5, this d5 might be a bit vulnerable, and white now plays bishop d3, Fischer plays knight c6, and now the standard knight f3 is interesting, but even more interesting, I think, and the engines seem to like this move a lot, is knight ge2, because white can later aim at the appropriate time perhaps for knight f4, not with g5, but knight f4 at the appropriate time to target d5. So it's an interesting move, knight ge2 here. Fischer now played c takes d4, resolving the central tension. E takes d4, and now both sides castle. Bishop e6, which is a little bit of a target for knight f4 potentially, but at the moment, you know, black's got pressure on d4. So we see bishop c2 now, and this is a very crude idea at some level, but it's positionally justified, of course, as well. White's preparing queen d3 and bishop takes f6, and then queen h7 mate on the surface of things. And against this next move, bishop e7, not only unpins the knight, but it also means knight b4 is on the cards for any queen d3. Okay, so here immediately queen d3, there's knight b4, but Max plays knight f4, and he's positionally threatening this bishop. And here the 14-year-old Fischer plays the blunder of the game, in my view, absolute blunder of the game. Fischer played queen b6, and before we get into queen b6 in the game continuation, there's a couple of moves here which should be okay for black. Bishop g4 is very clever, for example, in that, well, if queen d3, knight b4, and there's no danger there. If f3, this is really the idea, the engine idea is just to drop the bishop back to d7 here. And in this position, if bishop takes f6, bishop takes f6, queen d3, we have a new resource. Because of this f3, we have a new resource. We can take on d4, check, and now we can play f5, and that will cover this diagonal adequately, and black's okay, but white's still slightly better after bishop a4 apparently. d5 is a problem. So, but it's not completely losing. So bishop g4 is interesting. There's also in this position bishop d6. So if queen d3, there's no immediate problem here in this position because of knight b4. let's just check this. Actually, I managed not to get a note for that exact position. I think it's knight b4. Just looking at bishop f6 though here. Black has knight takes d3 and then knight takes f4, and this is okay for black. But the other thing is about bishop d6 here is on bishop takes f6, queen takes f6. That's fine if the queen's there, because now g6 is possible here to barricade this diagonal. So either bishop g4 or bishop d6, it's not absolutely terrible on this sensitive diagonal. There's resources here for black against this battery plan. But Fischer played queen b6, and we see now the simple bishop takes f6, weakening black's control of h7, bishop takes f6, and then the very direct queen d3. What can black do? If he plays g6, knight takes g6 is pretty nasty stuff. In fact, again, I just check this dynamically. g6, knight takes g6, even stronger, pardon me, even stronger is knight takes e6 by a long shot. Knight takes e6 here is simple. Now if knight b4, knight takes d5, and things are nasty here. So knight takes, well, we just take here, we're up on material. If queen takes, we just take on b4 here. Knight takes b4. So this is a crushing blow. Knight takes d5. If f take, well, that's a disaster clearly because of queen takes g6. So okay, g6 is not really that attractive to play in a nutshell. So queen d3, we see Fischer playing rook fd8, and it's as if there's an open invitation for this check, as though the king's kind of safe here, and then Fischer might be playing on b2 and d4. There's a slight snag with this, illustrated by Max. Rook a e1, and we see some pressure potentially on this e file, and d5 might be taken to expose that pressure, and it's very bad now for Fischer. In fact, white also has a very good move in check here if he wanted it, with the same idea of them putting pressure on the e file. But let's see the game continuation. Rook a e1. There's no going back now. This diagonal has been ripped open, and the open invitation for the queen coming in. Knight b4, queen comes in, king f8. And for the moment, the knight on b4 seems to be attacking c2 and protecting d5. Okay, and if queen h8, then king e7. Queen h8 is not particularly effectual here, and this might be, you know, Fischer's calculations that this is harmless, it's a disaster for white. What's the older guy done? Let's have a quick look to see how disastrous queen h8 is here. If queen h8, king e7. Actually, even this, white can still play queen h7, but it's not ideal compared to the game continuation. Or is it? Even this is winning here. If knight takes c2, we've got knight cd5 winning the queen. If queen takes d4, then apparently queen f5 is still really strong for white. So even that, okay. But there's even more crushing continuation here. I believe just a3, just pushing the knight away from the protection of d5. So Fischer snaps up the bishop, and then we use that weakness of the last move. Knight c takes d5, attacking the queen. And if this e file is controlled, then queen h8 is mate. That's the point here. So white's threatening mate in 1 now because of that knight controlling e7. If g6, well, we can just take the queen. Rook takes d5 was played. After knight takes d5, Fischer resigned here. It's not very pleasant at all, this position. What can black actually do? You might think, well, he's won a little bit material. Can black try and get some material here? Okay, let's see what black's best might be. G5 controls the H8 square. We can just take the queen here and then take the knight, and we're massively up. So there's nothing much here. Earlier, after rook takes d5, instead of rook takes d5, again g5 here, we can take on e6 and then just take the queen. It's really over actually. After this a3, that's a very powerful move. a3, I just want to show you this. a3, which Max played, is a really crushing move. Another move crushing is bishop f5, but a3 is one of the crushers here. So it is showing Max is pretty strong at the age of about 56 here against the young 14-year-old Fischer, who later on in the year, at the end of the year, was going to win his first ever US championship. Ahead of, by the way, Samuel Rzewski, who was another player who played in the Nottingham 1936 chess tournament. So Fischer had played some of these players with varying success from Nottingham 1936. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.